They're literally the same company. Doesn't that blow your mind? Hello, how are you? Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody and you're talking about something completely random, and then like a brand of clothing or something comes up and they're just like, did you know that that brand is actually owned by this other brand? And even though you don't own either of the brands, it doesn't really matter to you, your mind is still blown. The platelets of your life are shifted. So this happened to me the other day when somebody told me that Converse is owned by Nike, and that shouldn't matter to me. Like, why does it? But it just blew my mind. Like, how did I not know that? And I couldn't help but wonder.
I couldn't help but wonder. I couldn't help but wonder. I couldn't help but wonder. I couldn't help but wonder.
Who else owns who that I don't know? Because I know that every time I state Amazon owns Audible, Amazon owns the book depository, like it feels like something I know in my bones, but then I'm always finding people who don't know that and I want to just keep telling people. I don't know why. I think it's because there's this kind of misunderstanding in the general public, which might be constructed and semi-intentional by the corporate world, that when they look at a product and they see it has a name like Jif or Sif, they think they're looking at the name of the company. But there is a difference between a company and a brand. A company is an organization that makes all the producing decisions, produces the products and sells them to you, and the brand is the image or even personality of the company that is applied to those products over the top. Do you see where it can get confusing? So I did some digging and I have some fascinating revelations to bring you today. Let's go. Welcome to my wardrobe. Are you sensing another closet clean out on the channel? Because I think I might be. No, I don't want to talk about it. What I do want to talk about, like I said, is that Nike owns Converse. Nike, notoriously bad human rights violations. Links, I'll leave all the receipts below, to be honest. There isn't a shortage of them. But I wanted to talk, while we're at my wardrobe, about some more facts I found out about the clothes and cosmetic industries. So the one that really blew my mind, right? Etsy owns Depop. I thought they were rivals. I thought there would be some discrepancy in their like ethics, or like just things would be different, but they're literally the same company. Doesn't that blow your mind? Simple Skincare, which is a brand that I used to buy all the time as a teenager and as like in my early 20s, because it's notoriously like supposed to be like this friendly brand that's completely kind of neutral. There's not much like perfume and ingredients in them, which apparently isn't that true either, but like that's just what I've heard and I don't have any sources for that. But also they're owned by Unilever. Now, we do not have time in this video to go into Unilever, but oh my god, link to a video about that I didn't make here. And they also own Dove and Lynx. Dove and Lynx, both notorious for historical sexist adverts. Two sides of the same coin. They're playing us off each other, guys. Now, the Body Shop is one that came under a lot of fire a few years ago because they were owned by L'Oreal, who are pro animal testing, if anything. Not even a neutral sense. They seem pro, to be honest. And because the Body Shop was so, like, their brand was built on like no animal testing, that blew people's minds a lot. But I'm here to tell you the good news that they are no longer owned by L'Oreal. They're owned by a company called Natura. I actually don't know that much about their ethics. I couldn't find that much on it, but if I do, I'll leave it below. But at least it's the devil we don't know. Even if they are evil, it's not L'Oreal. L'Oreal do own, however, Yves, Laurent, Diesel, Maybelline, Garnier, Ralph Lauren, Armani, Urban Decay, and like a ton more that I haven't even heard of. WTF, WTF. Onwards. Let's talk about food. Fave topic. Let's go. Am I going to regret eating a banana like this from the internet? Am I going to find this on a weird site somewhere? Oh, to be so lucky. Big pop companies. If you don't live in the UK, do you call it pop? What do you call it? We call it pop. Fizzy drinks. If I was gonna cast an aspersion, I'd say like they probably know their days are numbered, which is why they invest in all these other companies, because people are realizing that like pop isn't great for the old pearly white. But you know, like Quaker Oats, again reiterated by many brilliant Quakers everywhere, not ran by Quakers, but it's actually owned by Pepsi, who also own things like Doritos and Mountain Dew. But I thought that Quakers was the weirdest one. Like, I don't know, I just never expected it. Their pals, Coca-Cola, own that vitamin water fancy thing you see in shops that's literally just called vitamin water, but you know what I mean, like when you see the bottle you're like, oh yeah, that thing. They own that. They also own Smart Water. I mean, I guess water is a bit more of a stable industry to go in, even though it's like a basic human need, so it's kind of gross that we have to sell it, but it's another video, Lena, shut up. They own Innocent Drinks. What? And Coca-Cola also own Costa Coffee. Oh, ooh. Going back to our friends at Unilever, God bless them. Unilever own Marmite, and whoever is investing at Unilever seems to be really keen on ice cream, because not only do they own Ben & Jerry's, they also own Cardor, Walls, Cornetto, Magnum, Solero, and Vignetta. Vignetta, is that how you say it? I've never said it like that. I don't really buy it, it's a bit posh. Vignetta? You know the one. You go around to like a friend's house and they've got like their auntie round and they've bought like a vignetta. I'm kidding, I think we had that at some parties when I was growing up. If you eat it, it doesn't make you a Tory. Here was an interesting one. Did you know that Jaden Smith founded Just Water? And he's like trying to make it super ethical and low waste and stuff, and like he doesn't want to be the face of it, he just wants to like make it a thing that exists. I thought that was so interesting. Pringles are owned by Kellogg's, and why not let's end on a low note with our good friends Amazon, who own Whole Foods. What is even real anymore? Let's talk about social media and entertainment. So let's start first with ESPN, owned by Disney. ABC, owned by Disney. Those are two things that I'm told mean a lot to people across the pond. I really genuinely have no idea what those things are. WhatsApp, I know what that is. That is owned by Facebook, or what apparently we're now calling Meta, but that's a video for another day. LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft, as is Skype. What? And the weirdest fact out of this whole category that I found has to be that Snoop Dogg and Jared Leto have shares in Reddit. Why? Like they're like proper investors in it. Like, I just want to know what the story is. I think it's kind of a sensible decision if anything, but like, I just want to know the story, do you know what I mean? Back where I belong, on the floor. I'm kidding, I belong among the books. Among the books. So, those of you who aren't strangers to this channel know that to say I'm not a fan of Jeff Bezos is a slight understatement. But just to reiterate, while we're in the book section, before we go on to other people, we have to list again, because I like to say it loud, all the book companies that are brands that are actually owned by Amazon. Lots of people try and avoid Amazon by picking these companies, and they kind of, I think they know that. That's why they, anyway. The Book Depository, Audible, Goodreads, Abe Books, Goodreads' competitor, Shelfari, and, weird fact, they also own Twitch and IMDb. I don't know why. Why does anything happen in this world? Let's talk about some other book companies though, because I think it's really interesting. So recently, Waterstones has bought two of the biggest independent chains in the country. They bought Foyles a couple of years ago. That famously has built its reputation on being independent, and there hasn't been loads of consumer-facing advertising about the fact that they're no longer independent, even though I still love them and you should buy from them, and I love booksellers, and I don't want to say, like, it hurts my heart to ask you to boycott a bookshop, because they're not Amazon, and that's kind of the plus point of them. It's a low bar, but a bar nonetheless. So, and then they also very, very recently bought Blackwell's, which is a really old, beautiful collection of independent bookshops in the UK, and I honestly feel really weird about it. Potentially also because what is really interesting, and I'm saying this neutrally, I don't think I actually really have a full moral stance on this, I just think that it's something that more people should know, is that the only independent chain that is left in the UK, to my knowledge, is Daunt Books. Now, Daunt Books was actually founded by a man called James Daunt, a man who comes from incredible amount of privilege, was a banker, and then has started like this company called Daunt Books, right? Who are a great bookshop and a great chain. I love going into Daunt Books. However, he was also made the CEO of Waterstones. Waterstones has changed hands over loads of time. It was actually, I used to work for Waterstones, it was actually owned by like a Russian guy who some articles say is a Russian oligarch, but regardless, is definitely a billionaire, but was recently taken over by somebody else. It changes hands all the time, so I struggle to keep a consistent stance on what Waterstones, like who they're owned by and what they stand for, because it changes all the time. But what is interesting is that under James Daunt, Waterstones have acquired all the other independent chains, but not his, and he still owns Dawn's. And then to add weirdness to weirdness, he also somehow found time in 2009 to become CEO of Barnes & Noble in the US. So because like books is the industry I worked in for 10 years, I feel like I know a lot more of the nuance around it. And like I said, it's not I'm saying boycott Waterstones. I still buy from them sometimes. Although if there is a choice between an independent and a Waterstones, I'd always go for the independent because they pay their booksellers more and they are more likely to be around in the next 10 years. They care about their high streets, and generally just working conditions are a lot better for booksellers. However, I really think that it's very confusing messaging for the average book customer to be able to think that they're juggling loads of brands when they're actually just picking between the same thing. And also I worry for the high street. There's a lot of reasons why somebody might not think that books make enough money and just shut down a branch of Waterstones on a whim. And because of historically how Waterstones did their business practices, often a lot of the time Waterstones is the only bookshop in a town because Waterstones kind of like outpriced or outrun the old independent booksellers. So I'm just not a fan of having like one guy or one company or one random Russian billionaire in charge of like whether we have bookshops on the high street in the UK or not, because I feel like that has a huge cultural impact as well as anything else. Like I feel like with this situation, I could summarize my feelings as I have a lot of questions. But Lena, you say, why does this even matter? Who actually cares? Beyond the fact that maybe this will help me win a pub quiz in the future, like, what is this information's value? First, I'd say, dear listener, clearly we are different. You are not the fun fact person at the party or at the first date, because I revel in these kind of facts. But two, it's because consumer behavior is gonna have a freaking huge impact and sway on how the next 50 years go. And if you haven't been reading up on it recently, next 50 years, very key. Because how the next 50 years go has a kind of huge sway on whether we survive at all. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there are some videos about that up here. Now I understand tailoring to specific audiences. I've worked in marketing, I've even worked on a brand team within a company. Some of that makes sense for profit, yes, but it also makes sense for the customer. I like a jokey marketing newsletter as much as the next person. However, not being upfront with the customer about who you are as a company when they're buying from your company, because the brand is the fictional character on top of the company, right? When you're not upfront with the customer about that, or if the customer isn't let in on that, or is marketed to falsely or isn't updated on the information about the company, it makes trying in this burning world to make fair consumer choices, some could call that boycotting, but I would just call that trying where we can to make choices that align with sanity. Well, that makes that a nightmare. Like a literal living nightmare. If I was going to follow each of these brands and everything that I interacted with tactilely in my everyday life, it would be a full-time job to work out who was changing hands with who. You'd have to set aside hours of your life just to understand one supermarket aisle. And the idea of consumer rights is something that is embedded, if not effectively executed, in a lot of our societies. We've got the ASA, the Advertising Standard Agency. We've got lots of authorities that are supposed to be there to protect consumers. I myself, when I work with a brand or a company, have to be incredibly upfront about who is paying me. There are so many check boxes for influencers, not so much for other celebrities and TV companies and stuff. There's a brilliant video, not by me, up here about that, that's called YouTubers Have to Declare Ads. Why doesn't anybody else? And it also got me thinking, because I've been reading this book called The Law in 60 Seconds by Christian Weaver, which is fascinating, basically telling you your rights about if you know, anything from renting to like if you maybe want to get politically active in the street, or like what your rights are about getting arrested randomly. But the emphasis, especially in the shopping section, is all about like making sure that customers aren't being lied to. And say something like Foyles, which is a bookshop that has built its whole legacy on the idea that it is an independent bookshop. So much advertising spend, they're always involved in Independent Booksellers Week, like that is their identity. For them to then through the back door have been taken over by somebody who isn't independent and that not be made glaringly obvious to the public, I think is a kind of perhaps incidental, perhaps accidental, misleading, of the public. Like, you know, like you don't, why would a company spend an advertising campaign trying to tell people that they actually stand for the opposite of what they stood for before, or they're owned by people who have completely different values to the people that they did before? This is something that Body Shop came up against a lot when they were owned by L'Oreal. Now, you will sometimes now see some brands do this, and I like that they do. So like Asda now says part of the Walmart family, I think, or something, and Audible sometimes will say part of the Amazon company. So there is something that's becoming more normal, but the fact that I have listed all of these brands in this video that I didn't even know about, and I bet that you didn't know about a lot of them, it seems like we've got a long way to go, because when it comes to transparency, I'm not saying boycott, I'm not even saying trying to make what they're doing illegal, because a lot of the time it's just good business sense, but it doesn't make good planetary sense. You know, I don't want to make these things illegal, but I do want people to be able to consciously choose what they are participating in when they can, and that just feels like the sweatiest, most impossible job at the moment. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter what I think, it matters what you think. Which ones of these did you know about? Are there any more that I don't know about that you can verify with sources, in the comments below? Would you like to see packaging that has more transparently who the company you're buying from is, rather than just the brand? Thank you so much for watching this video. If you'd like to watch some more videos on consumerism, those are over here. If you'd like to watch some more approachable, fun, light-hearted videos on the climate crisis, is it possible? Let's find out. They are here. Thank you so much for watching. This video is made possible by the Gumption Club. I hold them in my hands. Look at them. They're so beautiful. They tip me per video to make sure these videos keep happening. Try and swap your money for goods with kind people where you can. Frog Snog out.